Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I have got to tell you about where I am recording today. So I mentioned in the last episode that I am in Montana with my family for a while. I didn't mention why. My dad is sick. He's been diagnosed with mesothelioma, and I am here to help with appointments. It's Montana, so of course everything is spread out. His appointments are 90 miles away, one way, so 180 miles round trip. That's really not that far in terms of distance in Montana, but it's helpful to have more than one driver. It takes some pressure off of my brother. At any rate, so I'm at my parents' house. If you remember, I recorded the last episode in my niece's bedroom. I am now at my parents' house, and I have created a recording studio of sorts in the closet in the room in which I'm staying. This used to be my brother's room, and the closet has been turned into what we call the cubby. And in the cubby, my dad took out the clothing bar. The shelves are still in the closet, but he built a platform for a bed. And so normally there is an extra bed in this room. I have taken the mattress out and am using it as a door. I've got soundproofing up. I've got pillows in the shelves behind me. And then my favorite part about this recording space is the ginormous teddy bear. You know those bears that are, this thing is huge. You could easily use it for one of those pranks where somebody gets into the bear. I wouldn't do that because he's a nice bear and I don't want to take all his stuffing out, but he is the majority of my soundproofing for this makeshift studio. I hope the sound is okay, but I just wanted you to get a visual, a little bit of a visual on where I am recording. My dad came in earlier and he was like, he's such a dork. He says, "Wow, a professional studio in our house." I said, "Yeah, I bet I just raised the value of the property or the value of your house by nothing." But anyway, I'm enjoying recording with a giant teddy bear. It's kind of fun. At any rate, I am here to bring you another author interview. I apologize for the delay between episodes. As I said, I am helping my parents, and Dad's oncologist said that cancer is a full-time job, and she wasn't kidding. So today I am speaking with author Kim Taylor Blakemore. She is a returning guest to the podcast, and it's always so much fun to talk to her. I really enjoy when she is a guest. We're talking about her new novel, After Alice Fell, and I don't have the number of her previous episode off the top of my head. I will look that up and put that information either in the show notes or later in the recording if I get a chance to look that up. Depends on if I can get internet signal in my makeshift studio to look that up. Oh, good times. Okay, so Kim Taylor Blakemore, the book is After Alice Fell. It's historical fiction, and the back of the book says, New Hampshire, 1865. Marian Abbott is summoned to Broader's house, asylum, to collect the body of her sister, Alice. She'd been found dead after falling 4 stories from a steep-pitched roof. Officially, an accident. Confidentially, suicide. But Marian believes a third option, murder. Returning to her family home to stay with her brother and his second wife, the recently widowed Marian is expected to quiet her feelings of guilt and grief, to let go of the dead and embrace the living. But that's not easy in this house full of haunting memories. Just when the search for the truth seems hopeless, a stranger approaches Marian with chilling words. I saw her fall. Now Marian is more determined than ever to find out what happened that night at Broader's and why. With no one she can trust, Marion may risk her own life to uncover the secrets buried with Alice in the family plot. Again, that is the description of After Alice Fell. It is the new historical fiction, it's a bit of a thriller, of course, by Kim Taylor Blakemore. There are some tie-ins to the book that we talked about when she was on the podcast the last time, The Companion. It's not a sequel. They're definitely standalone books, but there are some Easter eggs, if you will, of the events from the last book that appear in this novel, so that is cool. I love to talk to Kim about research, and we will talk about that in this interview as well. But I love that they're thrillers. They're not... You know me, I don't like a lot of blood, gore, body count, but I do like, a good intense read, and that's what these are. I also love historical fiction. This one, you probably noticed, takes place right after the end of the Civil War, so there's a lot happening in that time period. Right after the Civil War, the main character, Marion, which is my mom's name, by the way, spelled differently. She has an A instead of an O, but Marion was a nurse in the Civil War, and so she's got a lot of those haunting memories with her. She's also got the guilt of leaving her sister with her brother, and then her sister going to the asylum and ending up dead, etc. So there's a lot going on in this book. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the interview so that Kim can talk more about the book and the writing of it. So once more, it is After Alice Fell by Kim Taylor Blakemore.
Podcast.
I am really excited to have you. I had such fun last time talking with you, and we are here to talk about your newest novel, After Alice Fell. Before we get to the book, though, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about yourself for people who maybe didn't hear the first interview or need a refresher on who you are.
Sure. My name is Kim Taylor Blakemore, and I write historical thrillers. And I guess they have a sense of gothic and a little bit of mystery. And I live in Oregon, and I have rescue dogs and rescue cats.
I love that. How many animals do you have right now?
2 dogs and 2 cats, but we're possibly adopting a deaf Yorkie today.
Oh, well,
I
good
know.
luck with that.
Yes, I've been looking up how you take care of a deaf dog and doing hand signals and lights, flashlights.
Yeah.
It's pretty fun. Yeah. We have a cat that's totally blind, but he runs the house.
Of course.
Yeah, he's amazing.
That is wonderful. That's so necessary in life, to take care of the animals that other people don't necessarily want to take on.
Right.
So, at any rate, the book, as I said, is called After Alice Fell. Can you give an overview of the premise?
So After Alice Fell is set in 1865, just when the Civil War has ended. And it is about a Civil War nurse, Marion Abbott, who comes back from the war to find that her sister has been committed to an asylum and has consequently died there. So we open the book with Marion in the morgue at the asylum, identifying her sister's body. And the asylum owners say that her sister Alice committed suicide by jumping off the roof, but Marion doesn't believe that because she has been her caretaker her whole life, and she absolutely thinks something else happened. So the whole plot is her trying to figure out what happened to Alice.
Yes, and there are, of course, lots of good twists and turns and, suspense. So that's good.
Yeah, sure. It's got the gothic thing, right? There's like family secrets everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. What was your initial inspiration for the story?
I was trying to find a book after The Companion that was in the same genre because I needed to send another proposal to Lake Union Publishing. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was really wrapped up at the time writing another historical fiction, which I'm still working on. And I was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? It needs to be gothic. It needs to be thrillery. It needs to be in the same time period. And I was flying on a plane from my dad's house back home, and I just opened my notebook and said, what is the most Gothic thing that you can think of? And immediately an asylum came in my head, and then the morgue of the asylum. So I started writing right on that plane, and that's what I wrote on the plane is literally still the first pages of the book. So it just sort of came out, because when I start books and I'm trying to think of ideas, I think I told you this with the companion, it's generally images that come to me, almost like a film. So in this case, it was, pick the asylum, and then I just started writing, and I just said, what does that room look like in the asylum? Who's standing there, and whose body is on that table?
We're going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast, but of course, you and I both know that asylums in history, and especially in historical fiction, are not good places. So we're going to talk more about the definite creepiness of the asylum as the opening scene of this book. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Kim Taylor Blakemore. We are discussing her new novel, After Alice Fell.
It starts out definitely kind of creepy, especially she identifies the body and then she gets lost in the asylum, and it's just a sense of hopelessness as you're wandering around this building that we as modern people would know was not a good place to be.
Right. I tried to get into the New Hampshire asylum, and this was, so the New Hampshire State Hospital used to be called the New Hampshire Asylum for the Insane in Concord. Mm-hmm. And I was originally going to set the book in Concord and use that asylum. And I tried to get into that, but, the big part of the building is sort of condemned and closed down. And the outer buildings are used for government offices and archives. And we couldn't get in. Even my rock star librarian couldn't get us in there. The manager was like, it's just not safe. I was like, oh no, I can't do it. So I moved the whole setting back to the town of the Companion, to Harborough, which is it's a made up town. It's based on two towns on the Contoocook River. And I said, well, okay, so this is actually great because I can make my own asylum and then sort of base it on the one. Yeah. It's so great. I can make an asylum.
That's just so you.
It was fun. It was fun to do because I was like, if I move it back, I can put it on the hill. So when they're coming down that hill, they go right by the Burton's burnt out house from the Companion, so there's like these little Easter eggs.
Yeah.
And then, so then I said, what happens in those 10 years in this town? So they got the railroad. So it really grew. And then I just got to go kind of crazy. I'm like, I need a smaller town between because they live out in the country. But it needs to be walkable. So it's really fun to create your entire, villages in New Hampshire.
It would be. I mean, we often think about world building being more of a fantasy or a sci-fi kind of thing, but I would imagine that you get to world build in all kinds of genres.
Yeah, I think that's done a lot, and when you start needing specific elements, and if I think if your story is about a real town, you could never I'm going to do a fake New York City. Mm-hmm. Why would you do that? New York is already fabulous as it is, and it's got multiple ways you can take a story. But when you're taking a small area in a rural part of a state, I was like, this town that it's based on, if I really put it there, that town didn't grow enough for the plot that I need.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just make up your own town.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Let's talk a little bit more about Marion. What about her do you think will resonate with readers?
When I wrote her, I wanted to write a full-on heroine. So I really, really wanted to write one of those tough as nails women who will not stop until she gets an answer. So she's very driven. And in writing her, I was like, you are really driven and you're not very funny. Because, I remember in The Companion, Lucy's funny. This woman is not funny. She does not have a sense of humor. She is like, I want to know what happened to my sister, and I will give my life if I need to find that out. Because, and as I was going through it, I was like, what is Marion's drive beyond finding out what happened to her sister? And I think her drive is for atonement and forgiveness for leaving her sister with her brother so she could go off and be a nurse in the war. Which is what, so she feels she failed her sister. So by the end of the book, by the time she finishes, I remember looking up after typing the end, and it was like 11:30 at night. I've been writing for 9.5 hours to finish it. Room was totally dark except for my computer screen, and this is probably crazy to people, but I looked up, and Marion was standing right in front of me, and she just nodded her head, like, I told you I'd get you through that.
Oh, wow.
And that was it. And then she was gone.
And did that freak you out a little bit, or was it okay?
No, it was great. I just looked back and was like, thank you. You did.
Yeah. I love it.
But, I'm sure you've talked to other writers. We all talk to our characters.
Yes.
And they're very real to us as we're writing. So.
Right. And they all manifest themselves in different ways.
Exactly, and you just have to be careful when you're at dinner parties and stuff and you're discussing them. I've had friends turn to me and go, you do realize you sound like a nutcase. I mean, why? Because I'm trying to tell you how this woman murdered this. No.
Right. Well, and I remember last time we talked about some of the research that you do, and your rock star librarian friend who I love. Mm-hmm. I can only imagine that talking about some of the research that you do in situations other than like a podcast, people would be like, okay, you're not normal.
My dad called me once when I was writing. He's like, where are you at in the book? I was like, I don't know. I got these two women in corsets and their big skirts running around the forest and one shooting at the other with a bow and arrow. I don't know.
I don't know. We'll figure it out.
He couldn't answer it. He's like, really? What? I'm like, yeah.
Well,
and I was taking archery at the same time, so it was super fun.
Oh, cool. But then I just started thinking about the logistics of that, thinking of the time period and how big their skirts would have been. So running around, not only in corsets, but in ginormous hoop skirts.
Exactly.
It can't be
well, like
putting
it right after the, I know, I put it right after the war, so the skirts were smaller.
Yeah.
So if I had done it 10 years earlier, forget it. Or even 5 years earlier, they'd be like, I'm sorry, I'm stuck between two oak trees. I'm swinging by the bell of this skirt. Just forget this scene.
Just shoot me and get it over with. Get out.
Exactly, shoot me. Oh, the arrow hit my corset and fell off. Bummer.
Oh my goodness. So,
do you remember the old Carol Burnett show and when she did Gone with the Wind?
Yes.
She did a parody of Gone with the Wind. I can so parody my own books.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome. When you set about to create new stories and new characters, how much character development do you like to do before you start writing? How much character development do you do as you write?
When I started, I write to 4 questions. One is the dramatic need of the main character. What do they want? And then what's their point of view about how they think of the world? What's their attitude of the world? And then how I think they're going to change. And then I'll probably just write that very, very quickly. And then I'm like, well, who opposes this? Who's going to oppose this? And that helps me sort of develop the antagonist characters. And so it's very, very brief. Each of them has like half a page of the main characters. And then I really like them to surprise me and talk to me as I write. So I'll learn things from what they say to other characters and go, oh, that means I have to fix the backstory. And so I never have, some writers go really in depth into backstory and all this stuff with character. I don't do that. I like to find all that out as if I'm learning about them at the same time the reader is.
Yeah.
Otherwise, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask, does that ever lead to, like, complications? Do you ever, like, get sort of stuck in a character or writing corner because of something the characters revealed to you about themselves?
What I'll do is if they reveal themselves and it's a very strong thing that happens, I go, oh, that's a great plot thing, or that's a really interesting thing about the character. I have a little notebook that I just handwrite in, and I'll put a note like, look back to these scenes and see if you can make a change to them. Mm-hmm. So it sort of matches it. And then when I do edits at 100 words, 100 pages, 200 pages, and 300. And at those points, at those 3 checkpoints, I'll look back at all my handwritten notes and make those changes.
Time for our second break of the podcast, but when we come back, I'll be asking Kim my favorite question to ask Kim, and that is about the kinds of research that she has been doing. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with Kim Taylor Blakemore, and my favorite subject when it comes to talking with Kim, research.
I'm just laughing a little bit at the beginning of this question because talk about what kinds of research you did for this book besides trying to get into an asylum.
I did part of this research when I was in New Hampshire before, when I was there for the companion. And then I did a lot of research online with my librarian at the state library. I had done so much research of the area on the companion that I didn't need to do as much for this one. So the research was much more on asylums, mental illness, what happened right after the war, because there was a very big recession right after the war. And a lot of businesses that had made their money, doing war materials or whatever, found themselves like Lionel does in this, with nothing. And so I was really looking at those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. So a little bit different than before when it was like, what happens when you use arsenic?
Right. Right.
And then doing archery. So I knew how to do that.
Yes. Well, that's kind of fun research, I would think. And
then that's really fun. Well, it's all very fun, and I get to talk to really interesting people. There's the carriage that goes from Taree to Harborough, and I didn't know what carriage it was, and how many people and how many horses, et cetera. And I ended up calling a guy in New Hampshire who was the premier carriage research guy.
Nice.
And he's like, well, what do you want to know? Do you want 18 people, 6 people, 8 people? He's like, you got to come out here because I'll take you to the 6 places where the people own them. We'll drive around together. You can see them all. And I haven't gone, but it's on my list next time I get to New Hampshire to go do that. You know, it's finding a woman who has all these books of patterns of dresses from the 1850s through the 1880s. Because I needed that one specific dress, which I'm not going to talk about, but that Alice wore and then Marion wore. Right. So she wouldn't die in the woods. But I had to figure out if that was true. Yeah, so a lot, it's always fun. The research is so fun, and the people I meet, or whether it's online or phone or in person, it's just a joy.
Mm-hmm. Both the companion and After Alice Fell involve strong female protagonists. They also examine women's roles in these certain places in history, and there's some of the aspects of, you know, hysteria, and obviously Alice was committed to an asylum. So can you talk a little bit about your interest in that and your wanting to include those elements in the books that you write?
So all of my books are about fierce women, whether they're the bad guy or the good guy. So I really start with that to begin with, and place those times. And part of it for me, I hear like all women have no agency at this time. I say, well, that's a big giant wash. That's not actually probably true to say that about a group of people. So it's like, well, what was their agency? So as from the companion, their power was in the household. So it was all a power struggle in this. In this one, where does the power come from? And in this one, for sure, the women don't have agency, including the second wife. Right. Within that house. But they all find ways to get heard, seen, etc. And this is probably a little off topic, but one of my big things I wanted to do in this was to make sure Alice, who we know is mute, that she has a voice in the story. That was like really important to me. Yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it helps because it is such a different time from what we're used to, and so you have to really get into that mindset of how women were able to work within and around the lack of agency, or the level of agency that they were allowed to have.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the best word, level of agency. I think you're right. And I think women were very clever about it and how they did that. And then of course, I'm writing historical thrillers, so I could get a little bit of leeway in what they can do. Right.
What about historical fiction and historical thrillers do you think appeals to you? What draws you to this genre?
I've always loved the past and I love history, and I love knowing how people lived in different times and what they thought of and how they saw the world. And I've just always been fascinated with that. And where I go, that's the first thing that I go to. Historical Society. That's the first place. It's always on the list. So I know what it's like. But if I was looking at just historical histories and thrillers, it's because it's much easier to get away with murder. You can, if you look at right at the time periods I'm doing, there wasn't all the forensics. So it's to get away with things. And because there's no text of forensics, it's easy to outwit people and get around police. And on top of it, you get the danger, because the other part of the tech is there's no phones, there's no cars, there's no taxis, there's nothing to get out of a situation but your feet. your wits and a horse. Maybe if you're lucky, there's a horse somewhere. So
Yeah.
I think all those elements together make it a really good time period to have very dark stories.
Yes.
I don't think
Agree.
my stories are as dark as people say, but it's a sign of my own mind.
They could definitely be darker. It's a good level of darkness for me.
They could be darker?
Well, I mean, yeah, they
Oh,
could.
good.
Like, there's
I have one that I'm thinking of. I have one I'm thinking of next year that's pretty damn dark.
Okay. Well, so that actually segues nicely into my next question of what are you working on now?
I am working on the third book for Lake Union. It's called The Deception, and it is set in the same area, but in 1877. And it is about mediums, and fraud, and murder, and it is absolutely fabulously fun to write.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, learning all about the spiritualist movement, and because in that time period in England, the spiritualist movement was huge.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is also before everyone started getting exposed. So I get to do research. I'm reading stuff from the era. So reading list right now is like a book called Confessions of a Medium from 1877, and Manner of Light newspaper from the same period, and give a seance.
Mm-hmm.
My next step is, because I did this like massive stage show. It's basically one woman medium basically makes a deal with people in the story. But there's this stage show in it, and I'm having all elements of all these effects going on. And I'm like, I wonder if you can do all these effects in 1877.
Oh,
So my
yeah.
Monday morning, again, back to research, I found a theatrical effects company. So I'm going to be calling them and asking them, telling them what my effects are, and they can tell me how they're done and if they could have been done at the time.
Oh, that sounds really fun.
It was really fun. Like, I finally figured out how to make a ghost show up on stage.
Oh.
So, and it's actually really, really easy. So you can have everybody look up Pepper's Ghost.
Okay.
So if you've ever gone to Disneyland, to the haunted house, and everyone's dancing in the ballroom,
Mm-hmm.
that is all done with glass and mirrors and light.
Okay.
It is a very simple effect. But I was like, yes, I can do this on stage. I'm so excited. That was we have little highs we have as writers. And that was mine this week.
Nice.
I can have a fake ghost on a stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's going to come out October of 2022.
Okay. All right.
So,
wonderful. Are there any of your other books that you would like to highlight? I mean, we've talked about The Companion, but anything else that you want to mention?
I think that's good. These are good.
Okay.
If you like historical thrillers, this is the good set, because the Bowery Girl is straight historical fiction, just, But that was great fun to write in 1883 New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Final break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking about what Kim has been reading lately. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the backdoors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Welcome back to the conclusion of my interview with Kim Taylor Blakemore. Again, we're talking about her historical fiction thriller After Alice Fell.
And obviously you've been doing a lot of research and a lot of reading for research, but what have you done much reading lately for yourself?
I've had about 4 books in a row that I've been asked to do the blurb for on the cover. So I'm reading a book right now. I'm just finishing it. It's called Born of No Woman by Frank Borissi. It's a translation from French.
Okay.
So it comes out in October. It's really dark Gothic, and it's fantastic.
Right up your alley.
It's right up my alley. It's very Bronte-esque.
Oh, okay.
So it's my favorite book I've read this year. So I'll be posting it in my newsletter in a couple months when it comes out.
So very easy to write a good blurb because it's your favorite book.
Yeah, that was easy. I actually wrote them. I said, this is going to be the easiest blurb in the world. I love this book.
Love it.
No, I've been really lucky. The ones I've been asked to read, I've loved every single one of them. So
that's
lucky me.
Yeah, and you don't have to struggle with the author's use of commas is phenomenal.
Can I keep that quote? Because that's hilarious.
Sure.
Commas were phenomenal, and the exclamation points just didn't end.
All very well placed. You're funny. I've been hanging out with a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old, so I got to keep on my toes.
There you go.
I know you have a website, so if you can tell people the website as well as where they can find you on social media.
Sure. You can find me at kimtaylorblakemore.com. That's my website, and I am on Instagram at Kim Taylor Blakemore Books.
Okay. Thank you for that. Kim, we've talked about a lot of different topics. I always love talking to you and finding out what research you're doing, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you're hoping to bring up during our time together?
The only thing I would say is I want to add that I love visiting book clubs. So if you know of anybody or anybody listening has a book club, I would love to join you.
Have you done any Zoom book clubs since we've all been on lockdown?
I've been doing exactly, yeah. And they're fun. They're different, of course, but they've been super fun.
Yeah, and it kind of gives you the ability to go further afield for book clubs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I had one that was just about 3 weeks ago that was in New Hampshire. So they had a great time. Where is it? What area did you do? And it was fun.
Did they all have theories on where your fictional town was?
I told them where it was because it's literally based on the town of Peterborough and Harrisville mixed together, and then the small town in After Alice Fell is based on a small town called Temple. So it's literally a area right by Mount Monadnock. Okay. So all right. Yeah, I don't keep that a secret.
Okay. You go find the places.
It's kind of fun though, because in the new book I'm doing, it's 12 years later, so it's what can I do with the town?
Yeah.
So that's been really fun because I've just really expanded it bigger.
Mm-hmm. That is really cool.
The boom of the 1870s after that recession was great. And so that was really fun to go, oh, good, and I can put in more Easter eggs. How fun.
Mm-hmm.
The main character goes to a graveyard because, of course, Gothic.
Right, well, yeah.
And finds the grave of Mary Dawson from the companion. So that's really fun for me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, so more Easter eggs.
Yeah.
Excellent. I very much like that you kind of, you don't have, they're not sequels, but there's the little tie-ins, which are fun to look for. So, well, I want to thank you so much. I always have so much fun talking to you when you join me on the podcast. So just thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I absolutely love talking to you.
Thank you once again to Kim for joining me. As I've said before, I always have so much fun when she is on the podcast. I really enjoy not only her novels, but having conversations with her about those novels. So, Kim, thank you for that. Thank you for listening and joining me in what I'm going to now call Giant Bear Studios. It seems appropriate given the giant teddy bear and, the Montana location. So, Giant Bear Studios. It's not a bad place. The company is nice. Big, giant, fuzzy, warm, loving guy in the corner with me. Doesn't say much. Ergonomically, it's not the best place to work. I'm gonna have to figure that out. As I'll keep you posted as I do more recordings from the Cubby, otherwise known as Giant Bear Studios here in Plains, Montana. So thank you, as always, to you, my listeners. I so appreciate you. I hope that you will join me for the next podcast. I am really excited about this one because my 10-year-old niece is joining me. She and I read the book together. It is called Finding My Yip by Christine Isley Farmer. It is a children's book. It has a dog. It's a lot of fun, and we had a lot of fun reading it together, so I'm excited to bring that interview to you. In the meantime, if you're a fan of the podcast, I would love it if you could do me the favor of writing a nice review or leaving a starred review. That's helpful. 5 stars, of course, are wonderful, but whatever, wherever the spirit takes you. You can also follow the podcast on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, GSMC Book Review. Pretty easy to find. And, thank you so much for joining us. Chaco the Giant Bear is with me. So, joining us, me and Chaco. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I hope that day is involving plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. And I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.